Thank you, Edna. Looking at sustainable development in the Middle East, Africa, and Southeast Asia region, it's the fastest growing population globally, and I think sustainable development is a key issue for everyone. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce or go to our first panelist, Engineer Nawal, who is Head of Development of Infrastructure at the Ministry of Energy in the United Arab Emirates. And I'd like to know from you, what are or where are the areas of growth identified for the UAE over the next 50 years in the context of sustainable development?
Yes, thank you, Emil. Okay, according to the UAE Vision of Sustainable Development, as everyone know, in 2010, UAE government launched the UAE Vision 2021, which aims to make UAE one of the most best countries in the world by the time of Golden Jubilee. And the UAE has launched also the national agenda, which was developed to guide efforts towards achieving the vision across the 6 national priorities, which is education, health, economy, infrastructure, housing, and security, as well as government services. The UAE development priorities are also aligned with the concept of the Global Sustainable Development, where UAE was one of the contributors to the UN Agenda 2030 during the Rio Plus 20 conference. It became also one of the 30 members of UN Open Working Group to develop a set of 17 SDG in 2015. To ensure this implementation of these goals, UN formulate a SDG framework that consists of several targets and indicators. Given those sustainable development goals, which are the heart of the UAE development plan, the SDGs serve as a complementary framework to guide countries' effort to achieve objectives on both Vision 2021 and UAE Centennial 2071. The focus of those 50 upcoming years is, and the 4 main pillars are future-focused government, excellence in education, a diverse knowledge economy, as well as a happy and cohesive society. And for this year, it was announced that 2020 is the preparation for the next 50 years. This announcement makes the formulation of the largest national strategy of its kind to prepare for the next 50 years on both federal and local level. It marks the preparation for UAE Golden Jubilee celebration 2021. Where citizens, residents, government, public, and private sectors take part in this formulating for the next 50 years of the UAE. As a ministry also, we have also some targets, future targets and trends for the energy and infrastructure, where we also focused on the urbanization and the demographic in the society of Emirates. We also focus on the lifestyle and the sustainable cities that support the circular economy. We also focus on the smart cities and interactive. We also will focus on the agile and the resilience of infrastructure. Thank you, Emil.
Thank you very much for that. Is it a coherent structure or plan where all the Emirates work together under the ministry?
We have already national teams working together towards achieving this goal. As I said, 2020 was the preparation year for the next upcoming 50 years. We are still working on this plan, and we will announce it at the end of this year, inshallah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Moving on to Loay, advisor to the Ministry of Works in Bahrain. Loay, with Bahrain being an island nation, is there fundamental differences in the approach to sustainable development? And what is the main focus for Bahrain on improving sustainable development?
Bahrain being small island, it is at the forefront of many of the issues like sea rise and global warming. Even though these are not unique to Bahrain, they're global issues. but small islands are the most susceptible to climate change and sea rise level. Another factor that is affecting our strategy is small islands usually have small population and smaller market, and the cost of infrastructure per capita is high. So we tend to optimize our infrastructure solutions and ensure there is a cost-benefit element in all our infrastructure projects. So these are the main issues that are affecting our strategy. Another thing, small islands, they depend on the sea for their livelihood. Bahrain has so many fisheries and so many heritage in the sea that needs to be preserved, and this is being affected by the climate change and rising sea level. We're experiencing drought periods, we're experiencing land loss sometimes because of inundation, and so these things have to be considered. One of the things that we've done in Bahrain is to ensure that all new buildings are built 2.4 meters above mean sea level, which means we take the mean sea level now and we have a provision of 2.4 meters in case of rising sea level for the next 100 years, which is not expected to be more than 30 centimeters in the next 100 years. But this is like one of the things that we effectively implemented in Bahrain, is new coastal buildings need to be 2.4 meters above. This is also needed for stormwater protection, because many of the storms that hit Bahrain are aggressive and they're more frequent and they're intense. So the 2.4 meter helps to mitigate this. Bahrain has very effective coastal risk mitigation strategies. Some areas we effectively protect by providing armored truck protection. Some areas we give in. We let the sea take it over because the cost to protect is too much. Other areas we try to beautify. In other words, we somehow try to manage the rising sea level. But overall, Bahrain is reliant on global cooperation in terms of global warming and rising sea level, and it's we try to do concerted effort with other GCC countries to help mitigate, and this includes pollution to the sea, because many of the Gulf area is heavily trafficked by oil tankers. Any oil leakage in the sea will affect the livelihood of countries like Bahrain and other GCC. So Bahrain is very active in monitoring the vessels in the Gulf, the contamination that is taking place, and is continuously making sure that any incident is quickly mitigated and resolved. This is in brief.
Thank you very much for that. I don't think we always realize the difficulties and challenges facing island nations compared to a lot of the countries in the world, which is probably, looking at Africa specifically, high rise doesn't have the same challenges. And certainly the cost, as you mentioned, from a sustainable point of view, it's difficult to imagine what needs to be done to really do it on a sustainable basis. And then moving on to Dr. Majid Al-Bahari, with the Ministry of Municipal and Rural Affairs in Saudi Arabia. Dr. Majid, there's so many competing mega projects in Saudi Arabia. Is there a priority in developing all these mega projects simultaneously, or is there a preference to focus on specific areas first? Because it's enormous. I mean, these are mega cities with billions of dollars.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you all for attending today. And yes, as you know, Saudi Arabia now has actually a revolution in terms of the urbanization, and this aspect we have a very solid story from the beginning. For example, Riyadh just within 50 years ago now in Riyadh history and its growth from a small settlement into a great modern city are incredible link to the rise of the Saudi Arabia state. with the Riyadh as a capital of its, as a capital of the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which Abdulaziz ibn Abdurrahman al Saud founded. It was like very huge growthly, and by like 50 or 60 years, it's coming now about 8 million population. That actually affect in terms of the urbanization here in Saudi Arabia, and it's very good case actually. Riyadh has several, let me say, several stages in terms of its development. For example, 1970, it was the first master plan designed to Riyadh by Doxiadis as an international consultants come from Greece, and he has a long experience in Americas and in like Africa or Asia states. He comes here to Riyadh, he developed the first master plan. And after that, he actually, the Doxiadis plan made some, let me say, main principles for the Riyadh city. Then they developed that master plans by Skit International, as it's a French company, that was focused on the central of the urban aspects here in city center. And then Riyadh has let me say actually Rademeyer, they decide to start up with ADA, a Riyadh Development Authority. That was actually realigning to make the urbanization more and more. Actually, from 2016 till now, we have in the national school, we have the 2030 vision. The 2030 vision is actually focused on the main aspects of that in terms of urbanization. They are focused on that area, and there is a huge project such as Riyadh Metro, such as pedestrian circulation, such as many aspects. Actually I cannot. All ministries here and entities are working together to enhance this concept, especially in the kingdom and especially here in Saudi Arabia.
How does that compare the Riyadh development to all the other mega city projects that's being developed at the moment as well? You've got NEOM and Red Sea development and so on. Are all these simultaneously being looked and developed at your involvement? Or is there a priority? Is there let's finish Riyadh before we move on to some of the others? Or are all happening all at the same time?
I think those are slightly different from Riyadh, because Riyadh is already built. The people is huge. It's capital city. It's one of the let me say metropolitan city in the world. And the new cities here in Saudi Arabia, which was created recent years, such as the NEOM, Amala, or Al Gaddiya, they are let me say mega projects with the specific purposes. So the good thing here in Saudi Arabia, we have the capacity, we have the ability to do it, and we have the, let me say, the fund, which is, I think, the main obstacle for the other countries. But if I would focus on, I mean, the big challenge is inside Riyadh, the Riyadh city center, which is very different example from the others. And I think the main challenge now is how to link those projects together to rise up the quality of life here in Saudi Arabia in terms of urbanization.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to Pratap Padode.
You're welcome.
In India. Welcome. I'd like to know from you, India and other Indian cities are some of the most populous in the world, which is, almost on the flip side from what we find in the Middle East. And what are the priorities with regards to urbanization and sustainable development for those cities in India?
Thank you, Emil. I think, as you know, India is well known for one definite thing, that its population has been increasing rapidly. Just to give you a perspective, in the last 10 years, the population has grown by 50% in the major urban centers. I heard Dr. Majid saying that Riyadh was around at 8 million. This was the time when Bangalore in 2011 was around at the same figure. And now it's around 12.5 million. So, the population, the growth of population and the leverage on the infrastructure, city infrastructure is so high that the government has to continuously be investing nearly 8 to 10% of its GDP in building infrastructure constantly. And the moment it starts to slow that down, there is a very perceptible difference in the whole growth in the economy, because these investments into infrastructure actually lead on to multiplier effect in the economy. But now we have a situation where 25% of our urban population is in the slums. So that's a big area to look at, because the government wants to provide basic amenities like affordable housing, clean water on tap, sanitation, hygiene, etc. And that constantly gets challenged with limited resources and the kind of pressure the migrant population, which migrates from the rural households to the cities, constantly is providing. So for example, we had 31% of Indians living in the urban India in 2011, and we expect that to go to 39% by 2036. So something like 40% by 2050 is what the expectations are, and this is already huge. We're talking about 470 million people living in cities, urban centers today. So you can imagine the kind of pressures that are building up there. The government recently surveyed around 4,200 cities, and the whole survey was to plan to provide, to see whether we've been able to provide toilets and sanitation, solid waste management facilities, and so around 6.6 million toilets have been created in the last 4 or 5 years, and so many other facilities are being created. There is a sense of, the smart cities mission, when it came about, the idea was to inspire, and people felt, why are we actually doing smart cities when basic amenities are not there? But the idea was to inspire the rest of the town planners, the builders, developers, to come up with plans which can give a better life to its citizens, and they could probably, duplicate the efforts that were going across by the government. And the stakeholders, or the government, the central government, the state government, and even the citizens, their views were also taken. So in that sense, the Smart Cities mission to a large extent has awakened, urban rejuvenation in India, and has been able to inspire a lot of urban planning, town planning, etc. So now we have competitions between cities for cleanliness, for sanitation, for so many such parameters. So I think in that sense, the awareness that this city infrastructure needs to be built continuously to provide those kind of facilities is grown a lot.
I mean, I can only imagine that with the slums, and I guess with the focus, that would be a focal point, yeah, because from having nothing in place, with existing population in the location, you got to develop somewhere. Do you start outside? Do you redevelop the location where they are? How would you go about that?
So now we had 100 smart cities planned out, which actually went into a competition. and they were selected out of a lot more applications. We had, now it's around 6 years already of this, and development has taken place. Around $30 billion worth of projects have actually already been given out and contracted, and a lot of nearly 6,000 projects have been already completed. So things are going along those lines. There is a mix of, so construction related projects which are hard infrastructure to be created, and there are smart city initiatives also, like technology initiatives, which comprise nearly 20-25% of the total spending. Apart from this, we have another 500 cities which are called the Amrit cities, and these Amrit cities are basically to provide basic amenities. But apart from that, the government has a plan where they have built a 5-year plan now called the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which will basically connect with railways, roads, even optic fiber installations. We've already, I think we have around 600,000 villages, and we want to take the optic fiber installations from 150,000 currently to 600,000 within the next 3 years. And then we have also got agriculture reforms. Again, agri infrastructure is being created so that the farmers can self-produce. A lot of this is always interfaced with technology, because somehow, although we don't have, let's say the number of people who are poor or don't have basic amenities is more, but somehow their ability to use digital technology has been amazing. I mean, we have the largest smartphones users in the world, second largest at least. And so somehow it's a leapfrog kind of a situation we're going to see in India, that although you don't have anything, but when you provide the basic infrastructure, people are able to leverage on that and scale up. And that scaling up, the scaling up is a big challenge itself, How do you manage the scaling up?
Can only imagine. Thank you very much for that. Going back to Engineer Nawal. If we can maybe move on, I've heard about the UAE's National Comprehensive Consensual Plan for 2042. I was hoping maybe you could maybe share a glimpse of that.
Yes, sure. So I will speak about ministry first. So Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure has contributed to the urban development of UAE throughout developing this consensual holistic plan 2042. And where also our responsibility is to construct and maintain the federal infrastructure projects such as government buildings, houses, and developing federal road network linking all the 7 emirates. It's also working towards proposing and developing policies, strategies, legislation, and coordinate with all the local and related authorities to achieve the security, sustainability, and competitiveness of the infrastructure, energy, and water, and to reduce also the greenhouse gas emission. All of this towards ensuring the quality of life of UAE residents. In UAE, there's the SDG goals has been distributed to the entities. For our ministry, we are in charge about SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal number 6 and 7 and 11. And we are responsible to lead, contribute, monitor, and report about the UAE achievement towards indicate objective of making cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable by 2030, also to provide clean water and ensure the provision of affordable clean energy. From this, the launch of the conceptual plan was in 2017 as a phase 1. And the aim of this conceptual plan is to develop a long-term integrated plan and a roadmap for UAE, which incorporates environment, urban, economic, and social pillars. The UAE National Conceptual Holistic Plan will contribute also to define the necessary framework for developing the national strategies and appropriate implementations tools to support synergies between the main actors and to ensure the better response to current and future opportunities and challenges, as well as provide freedom and flexibility for each emirate to enable it to follow its own development path and continue it and define its own and unique identity. This will greatly simplify by the tool that we are making to allow monitor progress in virtual real time, providing information needed for the decision makers and to understand the strength and growth pattern for entire emirates and anticipate the needs and optimize the optimal use of resources. The adoption of the geospatial platform for the digital connectivity designed according to the latest development in modern technology, which will allow the possible of dynamic monitoring and spatial related national goals. Understanding the synergy and impact of investment and securing the exchange of information across the Emirates, so the benefit will be spread all over the UAE.
Excellent. And how is that the plan rolled out? Is that done through the various municipalities in the different cities?
Yes, everyone was involved from federal level and local level. Phase 1 already finished, and we have the outcome phase 1. Now we are launching phase 2 in 2021, which will be finished hopefully within 1 year, and then we will publish it in the website.
And then it would be executed, then obviously everyone will go away.
It will be executed and everybody will have his own responsibility and role. This is for sure, yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Loay, if we go back to you in Bahrain, so post-COVID-19, what is the outlook for PPP opportunities in Bahrain? I mean, we've said, limited resources available. How will the Bahrain government fund and implement a lot of these much needed development?
Well, that's a good question. COVID-19 is not really a financial crisis. It's a revenue demand crisis. The revenue demand had fallen so much, so many projects had become unfeasible. As a result of COVID-19, government borrowed money from banks, and this created short-term liquidity crisis in the banking system. But the long-term liquidity is healthy. The problem is not the funding really; it's the feasibility of many projects that need to be rethought. For example, COVID-19 is likely to affect behavioral changes. How we designed sport facilities will change. The need for huge closed systems like airports, because these facilities proved to be a perfect environment for the virus. So anything that is related to closed environment is being rethought and being brought back to the drawing board. This affects the tourism sector as well. This affects the transportation sector, obviously, because not only airports demand had fallen, but public transport system had been questioned. For example, light rail projects are being questioned. Why do we need light rail projects while we can deal with the congestion issue in other forms of transport system like buses? Because buses, they give at least lesser contaminated area compared to light rail systems. So many of the infrastructure projects, especially in the transport sector, are being brought back to the drawing board to discuss alternatives. On the other hand, you see other projects being accelerated, like sewage treatment plants are being accelerated because we discovered people staying at home are consuming more water and therefore like 30% more, and this is putting pressure on the sewage treatment plants. So the sewage treatment plants are being accelerated in Bahrain. In terms of financing, Bahrain had always relied on long-term debt from either export credit agencies or export credit banks or public-private partnerships. Public-private partnership problem is global. The public-private partnership market is not very if I should, the word enthusiastic about entering into new project before realizing the scope and the extent of the COVID-19. Many of them are having uncertainty about how long this thing will last. It's not whether we will find vaccine or not, but the uncertainty of the future in terms would other viruses come up, and therefore would we be more susceptible to similar crises. So this uncertainty element is holding back on public-private partnerships, and many of these firms are asking the government to take the revenue or the demand share, which is not really helping the government decide, because the government like to transfer the risk. That's the whole notion of public-private partnership. So to summarize all of this, we are proceeding with caution. Projects that are feasible and we know that they are sustainable for the future are given a green light. Projects that need to be rethought in terms of demand are being brought back for further analysis.
Thank you very much for that. Makes a lot of sense. Moving on to Dr. Majid. In the kingdom, it's extremely large and sparsely populated, at least in the, not urban obviously, but outside of the cities. So how big is the challenge of urbanization in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think there is a special case here in Saudi Arabia in terms of its space and in terms of how far is the cities between each other. So from the south to north, from the east to west. And we have done, last year, we have finished the NSS white paper, which is the National Strategy, Spatial Strategy. So the white paper is actually relying on the importance of how to connect and how to connect each cities linked together, and how to connect them to being more efficient in terms of its urbanization aspects. And we have done actually, let me say, on the local city here in Riyadh, we have done some strategies with aligning with the Riyadh Metro project as well, to develop the pedestrian circulation and the urbanization around the city. There is, I think, one main fact should I mention, which is the weather. The weather here is being a problem, especially in summer and in the Gulf countries as well. So in summer, we have a special occasion, which temperature reach about 50 or 55 degrees, and that's actually one of the main barriers between the urbanization and walkability in terms of the urbanization here in Saudi Arabia. This is, I think, one of the main aspects. And at the second aspect is the car used as well. So people here in this country or in a Gulf country loves the car because car is privacy, car is air conditioning, car is easy to going somewhere and come back from anywhere you want. And I think this is gonna be another issue as well. There is, I think, in terms of our maybe culture as well, culture is affected on that as well. So we have actually developed some, let me say, some projects, some ideas to actually lead this file and to develop the urbanization in Saudi Arabia here. What I should mention that we are working now, I think here in Saudi Arabia, as a project is going ongoing everywhere. So if you come to Riyadh, you will see Riyadh is like a workshop, a huge workshop, working every section in city. But I promise that the Vision 2030 will change the country, inshallah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Moving on to Pratap, back to India. What are the challenges to sustainable development in India?
So, of course, population was one, but I think going with this COVID-19, all plans like our other panelists mentioned have gone for a real six, in that sense that sustainability has become a major issue, and that is in the view of the fact that demand has been replaced by fear. And obviously everything is getting postponed and deferred, and people are also examining, do we really need what we were constantly thinking that we needed? Now, in India particularly, one thing that has happened is the entire scenario is flattened out. So today, if people can work from home, we can also recruit, employ people from tier 2 towns, tier 3 cities, and it doesn't matter whether they are in Mumbai or Bangalore or Delhi, because if they are not, we can still. So that means a whole lot of new working class, which was missing out on the opportunities of the main cities, metro cities, can also now come into the fold. Even women who took probably retired from work because of maternity leave, etc., they can get back into the working system. So that's another opportunity that is waiting. Automation and technology. Obviously now you need to work smarter, you need to work in a way that there is least contact. So a whole lot of features in Industry 4.0 and various kinds of robotics, artificial intelligence, all these kind of technologies are coming in. And so in that sense, now the challenge is that when you want all these things to come in because they make sense, how do you make that sustainable? Because the private investment is still very shy. Everybody is still looking for government to make moves because they need the confidence to revive. So in the short run, the challenge can be actually taken care of by bringing in foreign direct investment. And that's what the government is doing. So if we do get, like the Japanese government has invested in our bullet train, we've had I think one of our contractors have got the biggest contract ever in the bullet train project, which is being built from Mumbai to Ahmedabad. There are 6-7 more projects coming up of similar magnitude, which will obviously give a lot of employment, purchase of building material, etc. So in that sense, there is foreign investment coming in with very easy terms on a long-term basis. That gives us an opportunity to build our infrastructure in our cities. So that's the way to go, I think.
Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. I think one thing that stands out for me from the panel today is that I think there's a lot that needs to be revisited. You know, traditionally, from a sustainable point of view, the thinking was a lot to do with density. You know, go high, people together, don't have to walk, don't need transport, you live and work together, play together. And I think COVID-19 has thrown that upside down. You know, suddenly it's all about spatial awareness and being away from people, social distancing. And it would be interesting to see in the long term what the impacts, you've mentioned it earlier as well, what the impacts of that's going to be in sustainable development in the future. And a lot of the models, you've just mentioned technology, a lot of the models that was developed was kind of developed on the old school. Suddenly everything is now different, and how is that going to change and what needs to be redone? But yeah, this has been fascinating. I believe we've come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank you all for participating, and we assume we will open for questions now.
Hello there, and thank you so much for that great discussion. They're really having a look at what is going on around the region, just really looking at what's happening around the region when we look at how do we plan for urbanization, because in every country it's going to be very different. And I'm happy now actually to have with us Nawal, Emil, and Loay is joining us. Dr. Majid and Pratap, unfortunately, we were great to have them for that discussion, but they've had to go for meetings. So I'd like to actually, if I could, Nawal, talk to you first. And when we look at the UAE, and we look at how actually your ministry is quite new. Both of these ministries and all of the issues have been looked after, of course, but energy and infrastructure have been brought together in the ministry in the UAE. And when we look at urbanization and we look at planning for cities, this is so important. Talk to me just a little bit about the reason why we have these two ministries together, and indeed what you're going to be able to do as a joint ministry, so to speak, now.
Yes, thank you. Regarding our ministry, it is not only, they didn't bring only the energy and infrastructure. The merger happened between 4 entities. It is the energy infrastructure, as well as the Sheikh Zayed housing program and the transport authority, which is 4 major sectors that achieve the well-being for the society and communities and ensure the national urban development across UAE. So the purpose behind this is to achieve the most important thing, which is the secure and sustainability and competitiveness in the infrastructure, energy, water, and also to reduce the greenhouse emission as well. All of this brought out to achieve the vision of UAE 2021 and also the next 50 plan for the country. The ministry now is responsible on the SDG 11 SDG goal 11, 6, and 7, which all about the urbanization and renewable energy security and water as well. So this is our new, inshallah, ministry, and we hope to achieve our country targets.
Yes, indeed. And when we look at it, stay with me for a minute, because I think for some people perhaps who don't realize the great work that's been going on here for so many years, it is actually so important. And again, I think when we look at how all of these areas will intersect with each other, so important. And I can imagine that the cooperation is beginning to really show you how you can build stronger cities and build better urbanization. What do you think, Nawal?
It's not only achieving a sustainable communities and cities only, it is a national effort to bring all those to show the new plan for the country itself, to prepare it for the next 50, in line with this excellent sustainable environment and integrated infrastructure that will achieve the high quality of life for all residents in the UAE, not only locals.
And indeed, when you think about it, UAE is still a relatively new country in many ways when we look at just the last 50 years. Thank you so much. I'll come back to you in a moment. Emil, when we look at infrastructure development, particularly in Africa and the potential that's there, talk to me particularly in terms of post-COVID, looking at sustainability. It's a very complex situation at the moment, and there will be a lot of challenges, particularly when we look around such a vast continent. Perhaps you could maybe address what's being done at the moment.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I think post-COVID, I think, a lot of the governments was, from a fiscal point of view, already under severe pressure, and COVID-19 has obviously aggravated that. So we need to look at how do we going to procure, this infrastructure effectively, considering the rapid population growth. You look at areas like Central Africa, all the way from Angola or up to Chad. Chad is, that region is growing at 32% over the next 10 years. So by 2050, just put into context, half or 50% of the global working age population, so those between the ages of 18 to 60, will be based in Africa. So we need to develop, Africa needs to develop at a rapid pace infrastructure to cope with that, coupled with migration, and then also already deficits. Across in sub-Saharan Africa, you have about, sub-Saharan Africa, only about 40% of the people has got access to power, not to speak of transport, so even just feeding the masses that, of people that's going to be added to those populations, we need additional 50 tons per annum of food just over the next 10 years. Now, how do you produce the food, and then how do you get it to market and get it back to the people? So they got to seriously look at how they're going to fund it. We need to look at successful procurement, And I'm happy to say that even on a PPP basis, we've seen in places like Rwanda, it's been very progressive. It's probably one of the countries in Africa, the easiest and the quickest to set up a company, less than 2 weeks, you're up and running. They've put the policies in place. They are completing the first water treatment PPP project on the continent this year. So there's pockets of excellence, but it's got to be rolled out across the continent very quickly.
Indeed, stay with me on that, because when we look at, I think the hopes and aspirations, for Africa, and we also look at energy poverty at the moment. Can we look at the poverty line, never mind access to energy, but also just the poverty line in Africa? I mean, when we look at the SDGs, when we look at the hopes for the UN, when we look at the hopes for every country in the continent of Africa, it is really about bringing so many people out of poverty. In some countries, it's up to 40% of the population. This is huge. So to actually, bring more people into, not just even a middle class, but even just bring them into work, bring them into gainful employment, put money in their pockets, have them become consumers. The potential must be just phenomenal in Africa.
It is huge. I mean, we've estimated that, in Africa, and to be honest, there's some of the sectors that we did not include. We just looked at education, housing, power, transport to an extent, but we did not look at water and so on. So there's a couple of sectors that we did not include. But over the next 10 years, Africa will need about $4 trillion to develop. And that's just catching up based on what we need. That is a massive amount of money that needs to be invested and to develop infrastructure. If you look at all sectors, I mean, I think estimates easily you're looking at $5 trillion over the next 10 years, and then it means that you just caught up. You still got to develop for the masses is going to grow from 2030 to 2050, where you're going to go well over 2 billion population, 2.3 or 2.4 billion people by 2050. So opportunities is massive. What is critical is we need to get government to focus on setting the policy so that we can get private sector to partner with government and actually come and develop the infrastructure.
Yes, this is so important. Nawal, when we look at the United Arab Emirates, talk to me a little bit about the diversity and the diversification of energy. I mean, right now we're still, obviously, hydrocarbons are still very important to the economy here. But again, I think when we look at the UAE, we see it almost as an equal opportunity, player when it comes to energy, quite honestly. We have hydrocarbons, we have gas, we have renewables, we have nuclear. Really bring me into this great story about the diversification of energy in this region and how it will help, provide energy for growing populations.
Yes, we already, if you heard about it, and already I mentioned it in the panel discussion, we have already the strategic plan for the energy in for 2050, which bring all type of energy, the renewable energy, the traditional energy, and how we are planning for the next 50 years to apply it and to ensure the security and the safe supply versus demand for the country itself. It is a big plan that ensure more than 44% of energy supply from the renewable energy only, and take in consideration bringing all the parties together, as it is the responsibility and which require a multi-stakeholder approach and commitment in order to overcome all the challenges that we could face. This approach also focus on setting a correct governance and strategy and infrastructure in place by harnessing the capability of the government, business, and civil society across all UAE and global as well.
Now, Emil, when we look at the energy story in Africa, it's certainly not the same in every country. It's not the same in every city, in every rural area, and there are issues here. There's been a lot of talks about, building mini grids and, bringing energy, because if you don't have energy, you're not going to have much more. And also in terms of infrastructure projects, that has to be, people have to be connected to the point of sale, so to speak. There's no point developing areas in the countryside and they can't get their produce to the city where the consumers are, various things like that. But talk to me about the focus and the concept of mini grids. I mean, is this the answer when we're looking at vast areas of the country that are not connected to the main grid, perhaps?
You know, it's quite expensive to obviously develop a full grid across any country. So the mini grids was a great solution where you have, you know, villages isolated where you can actually, you know, install a solar plant and then have, you know, access to power, which before there was nothing. Yeah. So certainly an improvement. I think the problem that we face is that, you know, because a lot of the people, you know, looking at 450 million people living below the poverty line. So number one, they can't afford to pay for power. You know, so even if it's subsidized, if you can't sell the power or somebody can't buy it, how are you going to maintain it? You know, which means that it's fantastic now, but what in 10 years time, what's going to happen? You know, so there's a fundamental issue, I think, there. It's got to be focused at developing grids across the country. And then we need to look at clever ways of doing that. You know, yes, we know solar is getting cheaper, but we also know that still, if you look at the life cycle cost of all the renewable energy sources, including fossil fuels, hydro is by far the cheapest. You know, it's capital intensive in the beginning, but over its life cycle, it's still the cheapest. You know, so we need to see how we can look at the balances of, you know, the base demand and base loads and get investment there, because the other issue that's facing Africa is drinking water, yeah, access to potable water, which is just a bigger challenge as power or sanitation. So the problem and the sad part that we've seen, you know, as a result of COVID-19 is the estimate is 230 million people has fallen below the poverty line as a result of that. That is, I'm not sure whether that number is repeated enough. You know, we look at globally what's happening, but it's 230 million people below $1.90 a day. That is just sad.
Not acceptable. I mean, in this day and age, you know, and we're hearing that from the UN, you know, we heard it from the IMF with the danger to COVID, you know, that the poor will get poorer on that. And one of the big issues, of course, in the region. Let's leave that. It's another discussion, that one. But I mean,
absolutely.
A very important one, really, because ultimately, you know, when we can raise that up, then there's more dynamics in the economy and, you know, everybody can thrive. Nawal, if I can come to you, and when we look at development of urbanization, and I know when you're looking at, you know, building for housing and transportation and all that, a lovely question I have here too is, you know, the smart cities that we're all looking at, we can't forget the connection to nature and to humans, because we almost live in these cities. And obviously in the UAE, we look very, very closely on people being happy. You know, for people, viewers who might not know, we have our ministry here that looks after, you know, people being happy. It's very, very important that it is. So talk to me a little bit about, you know, the concept of building in harmony with nature. Nawal.
Yes, sure. As you know, as I told you, are already a new ministry, and one of the goals that we are trying to achieve, as the UAE already launched the Quality of Life National Strategy for 2031, and one of the pillars in this strategy is about having sustainable communities and cities, which is aligned with the SDG 11 for sure. And the SDG 11, it is already about having a responsibility, it is about the sustainable communities as a sustainable approach. And the objective of this one is to make this city for the people itself, design the cities for the people to live in a secure and safer place, resilient as well. So our ministry is trying the best to ensure that we are covering the new trends that the global world already going towards, which is the AI, the fourth revolution, and at the same time, we aligned all of those for the benefit of the people itself. So we have something called human-centric design, and this approach we are already fulfilling in the ministry and the country overall.
And indeed it is. It's so important, as you say, too, to make sure that we have people at the very heart of it. This is what it's about. So I just want to thank both of you. Thank you so much. thank you for, taking the time to be with us. Also, of course, Emil, thank you so much for actually moderating that panel. Unfortunately, due to a few technical issues and some pressing engagements to Loay and Dr. Majid and Pratap couldn't join us for the conversation, but it was great they were here, of course, for the conversation. So thank you so much for moderating that, Emil. Thank you so much. And Nawal, thank you so much. And again, with your expanded scope at the ministry, so much work for you all to do there. We wish you all the very best, and we look forward to engaging with you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. God bless you.
Thank you.